For more, let's bring in White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt. I want to get to Ukraine in just a moment, but first of all, Karoline, some pretty good news on the inflation front. A surprising report that during his first full month of his presidency, inflation dropped to 2.8% year over year, reduction of 0.2% month over month. The president also pointed out a moment ago with the Taoiseach of Ireland, Michael Martin, that egg prices are down 30% in recent days, and oil sits right now at about $67 a barrel. And that's something that consumers really care about.
Yeah, that's right, John. And it's a promise that President Trump is keeping to the American people. This administration is wholeheartedly focused every single day on driving down costs for the American people through massive deregulatory efforts and, of course, by unleashing American energy dominance, which we know will end the inflation nightmare created by the previous administration. And this CPI report today is welcome news, and it's not what the so-called experts or the mainstream media predicted. They continue to cast doubt on President Trump and his economic agenda, even though he has a proven record of it working in his first term. And if you look at that report today, inflation has gone down. The core inflation index is actually the lowest it's been in 4 years. Gas prices have fallen. Airline fares have fallen. And also today, we saw two massive companies announce new investments in manufacturing in the United States of America. The Japanese beer company Asahi announced new manufacturing, new jobs in Wisconsin. All of these companies are realizing that the United States of America is the best place to do business, the lowest taxes in the world. That's what they will have under this president.
Karoline, speaking of oil, for years, since 2022, the Treasury Department's been issuing this waiver. It's Russian General License 8L that allows other countries to continue to buy Russian oil using the U.S. dollar, the U.S. payment system. Biden's waiver expired at midnight last night. Did the president renew it? Because if he didn't, it could send oil prices up by $5 a barrel.
Well, I don't know whether the president did or not. From my understanding, he hasn't, Jackie, but I can definitely double check and get back with you. I would defer you also to the Department of Treasury. But when it comes to Russia right now, as you know, the president's team continues to be in correspondence with the Russians. In fact, our national security advisor, Mike Waltz, had a call with his Russian counterpart today in a pursuit of ending this war and striking a peace deal with Russia and with Ukraine. We had great progress on that front yesterday with the Secretary of State and our national security advisor having those peace talks in Saudi Arabia. The Ukrainians have finally agreed to a ceasefire and have agreed to this long-term peace plan. And we expect, we hope, and we urge the Russians to do the same. And our team is currently working on getting this done.
So in recent days, up until recent days, I guess, the president was being criticized for abandoning Ukraine, siding with Putin. Now a ceasefire appears to be potentially within grasp. What's the over and under there at the White House as to whether or not Putin bites on this?
Well, we certainly hope that he does. And again, our team has been working diligently on negotiating a peace plan that works for both sides to finally end this war. And in any good plan, any good deal, both sides are going to be a little bit happy about some things and maybe unhappy about others. But that's how you negotiate a good deal. And that's what Secretary of State Rubio and our national security advisor were working hard on yesterday in Saudi Arabia. And again, this is about long-term peace and stability. And look at the tremendous progress that has been made by President Trump and this incredible team. I mean, before President Trump came into office, there was zero chance of a peace deal. Nobody was even talking about that. The only talk about this war in the United States was about sending more blank checks for the American taxpayer, who are incredibly tired of funding this effort. And so it's only because of the leadership of President Trump and his peace through strength approach, which the American people and the whole world did see on display in front of the cameras in that Oval Office meeting with Zelensky, that we are now at a place, we are on the 10th yard line of peace in this nearly 3-year-long war. Thousands of people have died, and President Trump is working hard to end the bloodshed, and now it's up to the Russians to agree to this plan.
Karoline, you mentioned that Mike Waltz had a phone call with his counterpart, and I'm hoping you might be able to shed some light on a Bloomberg report that just crossed. It says that Russian officials hadn't discussed with the U.S. The agreement that was agreed to in Saudi Arabia, and that they find that framework unacceptable, saying that they'll need to ask for their own conditions before agreeing to any sort of a truce. But we've seen in the past, Russia has made a series of demands, including that Ukraine should become a neutral nation, cede the territory that it's already occupying, reduce the size of its military. This is sort of predictable from Russia. What was the response plan from the U.S. side if this was the answer that came out?
Well, I won't comment on that report, which was based on anonymous sources, nor will I get ahead of these negotiations with Russia. Again, our team is actively engaged. Mr. Witkoff, Steve Witkoff, the president's special envoy, is making his way to Moscow this week, again, to urge the Russians to sign on to this negotiation, and we hope that they will.
All right, so let's move on to tariffs, because while we had some good news on the economy with inflation going down, a lot of people think that tariffs are a ticking time bomb. And Canada just announced that it's going to levy another $21 billion in retaliatory tariffs on the United States. A lot of that is going to be on sports gear, consumers as well. Could it possibly be, Caroline, that when these tariffs start to bite, that the progress that we saw in terms of lowering inflation goes the other way in the months to come?
Well, this administration is walking and chewing gum at the same time. The president is effectively utilizing tariffs, not just as a negotiating tactic, but actually implementing them, as we saw with the 25% tariff on steel and aluminum, to bolster those industries here in the United States, to advance our national security interests, to create good-paying jobs here at home. And you've actually seen the steel and aluminum industries applaud those tariffs as being good for their manufacturing, for their revenue, and for their workers, most importantly. And so the president will continue to effectively utilize tariffs while, again, driving down the cost of living in this country. Both things can happen at the same time. Just look at President Trump's first term as an example. When he left office, inflation was a low 1.4%. It was only driven up because the Biden administration spent money recklessly, and they drove up the cost of energy, which President Trump and his entire administration are focused on driving down. Or look at the massive deregulation that this administration has slashed. In fact, according to a report from the National Economic Council, we have already saved the American people $180 billion because of the regulations that we have already slashed. And we've only been here for 52 days. So don't bet against President Trump. Anyone who watched him in his first term should know that.
Caroline, I want to ask you one follow-up on this, because the American Automotive Policy Council has put out a statement sort of pushing back on this narrative. They said revoking the exemption for Canada and Mexico and extending tariffs to auto parts with steel and aluminum will add significant costs for automakers, suppliers, and consumers. You know, steel and aluminum tariffs obviously could have big impacts. Is it time for the president to do an Oval Office address maybe and try to explain to people that it might be bad for a little while, but it is, in fact, worth it?
I think the president has been incredibly clear, Jackie, on where he stands and what he envisions for the future of America. He wants to restore this great country as the manufacturing superpower of the world. And we have the ability to do it because we have the best market, and we have the best workers, and we have plenty of resources right here at home. What we need are these companies and these CEOs to recognize that, to trust in President Trump, and to move their business here. And many of them already are. We've seen nearly $3 trillion in investments pour into this country. And as a result of the steel and aluminum tariffs I mentioned earlier, a Japanese beer company moving its production to the great state of Wisconsin so they can save themselves from this 25% tariff when they're making their beer cans. That's going to result in good paying jobs right here in the United States of America. And now that company will no longer have to pay that 25% tariff, and they're going to have some of the lowest taxes in the world when Congress passes President Trump's big tax agenda, tax cuts, later this year. And so, again, President Trump is a businessman, he is a deal maker, and he believes in the United States of America and our workforce, and the rest of the world should do the same.
Nothing like an Asahi dry with a firecracker roll, I always say. I want to ask you about Tesla, because the president had 4 models of Teslas out there on the South Lawn yesterday. I thought, personally, he would have chosen the Cybertruck because it's very strong and big and beefy and kind of, you know, the sort of thing that I thought that I would see him drive. And there he is with Elon Musk. But it's really interesting to me that Tesla used to be the darling of the left, particularly leftist environmental groups. It was the car that was going to save the environment. And now you've got these left-wing environmental groups. They